Hello there. Have you ever noticed that great stories tend to stick around? If we're talking movies like Star Wars, The Godfather, or something older like the plays of William Shakespeare, timeless stuff that keeps living on through the generations, then we're talking about something that resonates with audiences on a deep and universal level. I could talk about why that is, and in last month's video, we even broke down how parts of the classic hero's journey relate to brand building. But the takeaway is posture. For a brand to resonate with customers, build a following, and stick around for years and years, it needs to posture itself with an audience in mind, and then find a way to authentically resonate with them. Kind of like a timeless story. One way brands do that is by positioning themselves as the guide in the story, not the hero. I talked about that in detail last month as well, but right now, and to put the final piece of authentic branding on top of the pyramid, we're focusing on understanding your brand's audience, the ones who will be listening to the story of why your company exists, what it offers, and how it wants to make one corner of the world a little better. Knowing your audience starts with paying attention, just like a good author does, or even a stand-up comic telling a crazy story. It doesn't matter if you're a startup, a regional branch of a large company, or a small business scaling your brand, the same rule applies. Good storytellers pay attention. So I'll go ahead and ask, who's your audience? In your brand story, who's the hero that you're helping across the finish line? Most companies have a good idea, and you might be thinking that I'm forgetting one obvious thing. Most companies have more than one audience. Don't worry, I haven't forgotten. In fact, it's probably true that when most companies build a brand, they build it with several different audiences in mind. Here's 4 that I think are pretty standard. Your customers, your employees, your investors, and your community. The specifics of each audience might vary depending on what kind of organization you have, but the categories will remain roughly the same. For example, a nonprofit doesn't have shareholders, but it does have donors who make a financial investment in the organization. An ethnic grocery chain community may not only be its neighborhood, but also the ethnic community in the city in which it plays a role. For each audience, there's a different adaptation of your brand story which makes the most sense to that audience. The story should stay the same, but the way you tell it will differ. Your employees might need to have a deeper understanding of the story so they can relay it to customers that they interact with. Plus, knowing the larger story helps them to have a sense of their own purpose at work and their own role in the greater vision. A good investor needs to know the context of your story. That's because context helps him or her see whether or not they should care about what you do and see if your goals are plausible and potentially profitable enough to be worth their time and finances. Finally, and unlike your employees or investors, a customer doesn't have time for the whole context. With a customer, you've only got a few minutes to tell your story, if that much. Your community, on the other hand, doesn't want a sales pitch. They aren't interested in giving you money or buying your service. What they want to hear are things like how you've helped the community, provided jobs for people, given opportunities, or sponsored community groups. It's a lot to think about, and the takeaway isn't that you need an entirely different brand story for each of these audiences. Whoever your audience is, the core of your story, the basics about who you are and what purpose animates your core values should be one and the same. You just have to know who you're talking to. Finally, and this might sound way too obvious, it isn't enough to just have a good story. You have to tell that story. This whole exercise is pointless if your brand story sits on a document filed away on a server somewhere. You have to make these ideas about your brand concrete by turning them into images, colors, content, a brand voice, and ultimately into relationships with your customers. There are different ways to tell your brand story. You can create a video, write a book, or design your collateral with your brand story in mind. You can create an identity through your logo and visuals, but the brand story is the genesis of everything else. All of the other expressions of your brand expand outward from that single point. The process of expressing your brand might be gradual. You might begin with a logo or an email signature. Then it might expand to some sign inside of your own office or an update to your website. Or you might just begin with your elevator pitch and how you talk to people about what you do. The important thing is that having documented your why, your values, your brand personality, You want to take action as a team and ensure that it fuels what you do every day. You want to make sure that it guides you as you interact with customers, communicate in your marketing, and make decisions. These are things you agreed were important, the truths about your brand. Remarkable brands, and trust me, I have no doubt you're one of them, they live out their core truths. They don't hide them. Everywhere the light touches your brand, your authentic personality should be shining through. And like a classic story, your audience loves and recognizes your remarkableness. Well, Remarka fans, this was quite the journey. Now that I've come full circle to your brand's audience, I'm excited to tell you that this whole series came from the chapters of our recently released book on branding called You Are Remarkable. It's out now on Amazon, and if you like what you've been reading here, the book will put even more wind in your sails. You can also check out the articles and resources on our website for more tips for your branding journey. Until next time, don't forget, you are remarkable.